Well, we're moving on this morning from looking at the Abrahamic covenant, and we're moving into the Mosaic covenant. But as I started preparing, I thought, well, there might be someone that watches it online that wonders what's happened in the last 400 to 500 years. We're moving into Moses now, and we just finished the covenant with Abraham. Well, what happened in between? How did we get there? Well, just quickly, remember with the death of Abraham, God continues now his work in fulfilling his promise to Abraham. The promise to Abraham doesn't end, and it doesn't change. Um, it simply carries on through Abraham's son, Isaac, and it carries on at God's pace. God is in control here. And so we pick up with Isaac just quickly. He's 40 years old now. Remember, he's gone. Abraham's head servant has gone and found a wife for Isaac. And Isaac has married Rebekah. And now he's living in Bir Lahai Roya, where a famine, like the same one that, not the same famine, but remember Abraham started out, there was a famine, and now Isaac's beginning, and there's a famine in the land again, and it forces Isaac to move down to Gerar in the land of the Philistine. And here God appears to him now and confirms his promise to Isaac. If you look at Genesis 26, and we'll read the first 6 verses. I'll start with Jeremy and Naomi. You guys read 3 verses each for saving time.
There was a famine in the land besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. Then the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land of which I tell you. Dwell in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. For you and your descendants, for to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father.
I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands, and in your offspring all the nations of earth shall be blessed. Because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac settled in Gerar.
Okay. So no doubt in our minds then what is going on here. The promise has gone from Abraham. It's now moved to Isaac. And then Isaac and Rebekah, they have 2 sons, as we know, Esau and Jacob. And the outcome, just quickly, of Isaac's blessing upon Jacob and not Esau, okay, is obviously the desired choice that God wanted. No matter the deceit on the part of Rebekah and Jacob. God just, not saying he overlooked that, but he was fulfilling his plan. And we see that in Genesis 28. Go ahead a couple chapters. Genesis 28 and verses 10 to 15. Gord, do you want to read 3 of the 10 to 12, and Kali, you could read 13 to 15.
Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went towards Haran. So he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reaches heaven, and there the angels of God were ascending and descending on it.
And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread and grow to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and I will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and I will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee.
Okay, thank you. There's no doubt in our mind, is there, how things have worked. And God reaffirms his promise to Jacob in Genesis 35. This is Genesis 35, and beginning at verse 10 to 15. Sandra, you and Jeff want to split that up? You can take 10 to 12, and Jeff can read 13 to 15.
God said to him, Your name is Jacob, your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. So he called his name Israel. Also God said to him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your father. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, I give to you, and to your descendants after you I give this land.
Then God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him, Bethel.
Okay, these stories we know. Remember these from Sunday school classes, but there are those that don't know, okay, these stories. And it just, by quickly going through that, it shows us that God is still fulfilling his promise to Abraham. And we see there that he has changed Jacob's name now to Israel. That's where we have to, a lot of times reading, discern who the Lord is speaking about there. And Israel means struggles with God, or God prevails. So just quickly there then, we've now reached what I call the outskirts of the Mosaic covenant, where we'll follow now the promise through Jacob. And Jacob, interesting, Jacob's known as the friend of God, okay? Like Abraham, but in Isaiah 41 and verse 8, Isaiah 41 and verse 8, we read there, But you, Israel, are my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the descendants of Abraham, my friend. Remember, Abraham was called God's friend, but Jacob here is called my servant. God says he was his servant and his chosen one. And we see now then that that covenant is going to continue through his son, Isaac, and now, or it continued through Isaac, and now it's continuing through Jacob. And we see here, I put up Jacob's family tree to help us keep visualizing this fulfillment. Jacob now has 12 sons. We know that. And they were jealous of their youngest brother, Joseph, whom they desired to kill. We remember that story. But Judah stepped in and convinced them to sell Joseph to a traveling caravan of Ishmaelites. So through God's providence, okay, this promise now is going to continue through Joseph. And he ends up in Egypt. And thus the unfolding now of God's second promise to Abraham and that was that I will make you a great nation, which again began with a famine in the land of Canaan. I found it interesting that every time there was a famine, everybody headed to Egypt. And I kind of wondered, why was that? Well, Egypt had the river Nile running through it. The Egyptians were agriculturally smart people. They used that water. Even every spring the Nile would flood, but they would store that water, irrigation, and there was always food in Egypt. And yet in Canaan, in the southern part, dry, arid place, when there was no rain, then there was no food. So everybody would head to Egypt. But God again now speaks with Jacob. He's renamed Israel, and in Genesis, in Genesis 46, I put these couple passages up on the screen. Genesis 46, 1 to 2. Tammy, I'll get you to read that, please.
So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here I am.
And 3 and 4, Barbara? Yep. Can you see it? Okay, so we just see here now the continuation of that promise that God gave to Abraham. And that we find in Genesis 15, verses 13 to 14. Then he said to Abram, this is God speaking, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. So Israel here now, the nation and Jacob, they're first welcomed as guests in Egypt, but things changed, as we know, with the rise of a new Pharaoh, and they became slaves and sorely oppressed, which fulfills what the Lord said, doesn't it? And the people cried out to the God of their forefathers, and the Lord raised up Moses to deliver his people. And after God brought the 10 plagues upon the Egyptians, Pharaoh let the people go. We remember that. And he let them go with articles of silver, gold, clothing, just as God had foretold. Where we see Joseph confirming, as they leave Egypt, Joseph again confirms God's promise to Abraham, to the sons of Israel. And in Genesis 50, verses 24 to 26, we read that. I have that here. And Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Israel now is on its way out of Egypt. And 3 months after leaving Egypt, the children of Israel now, we pick them up. They're camped at the base of Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb. And we read that in Exodus 19, verses 1 to 2. Lisa, do you want to read that? Okay, thank you, Lisa. So it's here now, okay, that God promised to make a covenant with the Israelites. And in verses 5 and 6 of that passage, wisdom? Okay. Here then, God makes his covenant now with Israel. And that is we've called it the Mosaic covenant or the Mosaic law. That's used interchangeably. But this is an example. Remember when we began our look at covenants, this is the suzerainty covenant that we mentioned earlier. It's one, remember, that's made between a superior, okay, or a superior king, in this case it's God, and an inferior vassal. And in this case, the inferior vassals is the nation of Israel. And we'll just point out something to begin with here in our study. The Mosaic covenant or the Mosaic law entered in alongside, okay, God's previous covenant with Abraham. It did not disannul God's covenant with Abraham. And quickly we read in Galatians 3:16 to 17. This is where we get this from. Paul says, "Now the promises were spoken to Abraham and to his seed." He does not say, "and to seeds," as one would in referring to many, but rather as in referring to one, and to your seed, that is Christ. What I'm saying, Paul says, is this: the law, which came 430 years later, does not invalidate a covenant previously ratified by God, so as to nullify the promise to the Abrahamic covenant here at Sinai. Now, we'll look a little later at a clear distinction, okay, between the Mosaic law and the covenant of promise. We'll look at that later in our study, but I wanted to point that out for now. The Mosaic covenant was given only to Israel at this time, to mark God's chosen people and his holy nation.
And thus, even it didn't annul Abraham's promise. Like as far as that God made this covenant with Israel, didn't change the covenant he made with Abraham.
Right.
If Christ later won't change that either, then Moses didn't.
Exactly. That's a good point. And we'll, those of you that look in depth into things, save them verses, because we will look at that, but just for the moment, I wanted to make that point. So back at the mountain now, God has promised to make a covenant with Israel, and he said that Moses would be the spokesman. Okay? I use this picture for a special reason. God spoke to Moses in Exodus 4 and verse 12. Okay, and he says to Moses, he says, "Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say." And knowing what God has offered here to Moses, myself personally, and maybe some of you, marvel at Moses's complaining and his plea that God might find somebody else to lead Israel. And that thought came to my mind when I saw this picture. And I thought, wait a minute. Looking at this picture, I asked myself if I would have stepped up and offered to lead Moses, to take over Moses' job. This was a nation of people. Sometimes it's hard for a group of 50 people to make a decision. And yet here, look at what Moses has to lead now. And is it any wonder that God reassured him that I will be with you and I will put my words in your mouth? Sure.
Well, when you think of Moses too, we have to remember he'd been rejected 40 years
Yeah.
earlier by this same people.
Exactly.
And so needing that assurance that God was with him, and then Aaron would speak for him. Like, he made all these excuses, but from our vantage point, not God's, but from our vantage point, we say, well, it makes sense. From God's it didn't.
Yes.
But from man's it does.
Exactly. But sometimes I think it reminded me of I think Romans 3, I just forget the verse about being humble in ourselves. Yeah. Just that fact that sometimes, we're quick to say, well, I wouldn't have had that problem. Well, I just thought of that when I saw the number. But before, in Exodus 19, verses 1 to 6, I'll get that. Exodus 19, 1 to 6. We read there, in the 3rd month after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And these are the words which you shall speak to the children of Israel." God only just spoke to Moses, okay? Israel didn't hear that. And we see in verses 7 and 8 what the people, before knowing the conditions, what did the people do? Look at verse 7 and 8. So Moses came and called for the elders of the people, and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. And then all the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And hearing their response from Moses, God promises to do something. He descends in a thick cloud that the people might hear when he spoke. Look at verse 9. Verse 9 says, "And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I come to you in the thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. So Moses told the words of the people to the Lord. Was that the only reason for God's manifestation on this occasion? What do you think of that? That the people might hear him speaking with Moses. What do you think of that? Why would the people need to hear that, do you think?
So that it would establish Moses' authority to them.
That, right, Gord?
Because God didn't speak to them, He spoke to Moses.
Right. Yeah. That was his intention, wasn't it? Was for the purpose of identifying leadership, wasn't it? When the people heard God speaking with Moses, then they in turn would trust everything that Moses said as being, yeah. A lot of times they didn't trust it, you're right, and they didn't believe it. But God's intention was that they trust Moses, as Moses' words as being from God. And so the events of Exodus 19, down to verses 10 to 15. And my question was, what were these events for? What was the reason that God done these things? And look at verse 10 to 15. Some of these are a little longer reading, so I'm trying to keep things moving. So I'll read it, 10 to 15. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and let them be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set bounds for the people all around, saying, take heed to yourselves that you do not go up to the mountain or touch its base. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. Not a hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or shot with an arrow, whether man or beast, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come near the mountain. So Moses went down from the mountain to the people, and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day, and do not come near your wives. So this preparation here, and the commandments that God has given, why do you think that, what was God intending for the people? Reading that.
It's kind of like showing that they need to sanctify themselves before approaching God.
Okay.
Or
Right.
coming before Him.
Right. And what does that say about God? Right. He wants to make a deep impression here, doesn't he, on the whole nation of the majesty of Jehovah, of God.
He did that with Moses too. He says, take off your sandals, this is holy ground.
Right.
Established.
Right, Lord.
So God doesn't change.
Yeah, that's true. And we'll also see too the holiness of his law. Okay, he's impressing upon the people who he is, and also he's impressing upon them the holiness of his law. And these people, Jeff?
I was just thinking at some point we find out that when the people came out of Egypt, some of the families brought idols with them. So not only does he need to establish, as you said, that Moses is their leader, they need to respect him. God needs to establish to them that he is God above all. A true God, not an idol made by hand that was sitting in your house.
Right.
He's doing both.
Yeah. And that's further impressed on them when Moses gets the Ten Commandments, doesn't he? And you think of the people at Sinai, and God had said that they saw His power in Egypt. Whether every one of them saw Moses and the plagues, they would have at least known of the plagues, okay, and the power of God. But here at the mountain, as God had planned, and like Jeff just said, He's going to impress them upon them as His majesty of His power. And it's interesting that He uses the medium of their senses, of what they see and what they can hear. And all they were about to witness at Sinai, and think about it, the grandeur and awe of God's power with nature. We see that through nature. And that would help. I'll let maybe one of you answer that. What does that help their minds to do? By seeing that, by witnessing what they witnessed at Sinai. We kind of already have said it, but put yourselves in their shoes. Would it not draw their minds into the pure character, first of all, about the law that is about to be proclaimed? Those assaults, those sights that they saw were assaults on their senses. It would impress upon them, wouldn't it? I thought of the thunder and the lightnings. What does that cause us to do? Sometimes it's not the first thought in our mind. God's nature, He created this. And that to me is what God had intended. And the trumpet, I thought of the trumpet that grew louder and louder at each time, was not one being blown by a priest, but it was a sound from heaven. We can't deny the impact that would have on ourselves, let alone Israel. And as we see the people tremble at witnessing all this. And I also thought too, though, God's character of grace. God expected Israel to obey Him, to keep His commands. But I saw there a character of grace on God's part is shown in the fact that He had Moses set up a boundary, okay, around the mountain. And as I thought about that, I thought, just in case there are any curious onlookers, God kind of covered everything, didn't He? It was, again, a command for them to understand and to obey Him. But He said if they go past that boundary, they're to be killed. They're to be destroyed. And yet, knowing of that boundary, that would have affected their thinking. They would have realized, no, we can't go by that boundary. Jared?
Shows you the incompleteness of their sanctification. They were to cleanse themselves so they could approach God.
Right.
But God's on that mountain, and He's still much too holy for them to even be there. They needed to follow God and sanctify themselves according to that, but that didn't get them to where they were on par holy with God.
Right.
It was an incomplete.
Exactly.
Incomplete sanctification.
And they're knowing all that is good for us too, isn't it? To be careful, to realize who we're serving. And so then we see after this awesome entrance that Moses is called up to receive from God, I missed that one, the Ten Commandments. And these, I'll just buzz through this one for now because we'll be ending in a second here. These are the foundation of God's covenant with Israel, the Ten Commandments. But they're not the entirety of it. The layout or delivery I found was interesting, that the first four deal with one's relationship to God, which God knew that should be the first four things, shouldn't it? Begin with God, okay? And then the last six deal with one's relationship to their fellow man. And as I thought about that, hearing that and being there, now within my mind, I have been directed in my respect for God. And then following that right away, I'm directed into my relationship with my fellow man. And it should be no different, should it?